Hi everyone, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here. Happy Thanksgiving. I guess probably about a day late by the time you get this, but well, happy Thanksgiving after the fact. Retroactive wishes. We're going to take a look at a game today that is interesting, I think, and interesting because it highlights how one should respond to provocative opening moves from the opponent, or at least one type of provocative move. The game we're going to take a look at is played between Zoltan Almashi, a very, very strong Hungarian grandmaster, regularly over 2,700, kind of overshadowed by Peter Leko and Judith Polgar, but still, fantastic player. And black in this game was Gadir Gusinov, a strong grandmaster from Azerbaijan. Not as strong as the big guns like Radjabov and Mamedyarov and Gashimov, but still quite a fine player, near 2,600. This was played earlier this year in 2011 in the Nakhchivan Open. I'm probably butchering that. If so, I implore your forgiveness and forbearance for that. Anyway, let's take a look. So Almashi had white, and he is the player who went on to win this game. So we have the Accelerated Dragon, which I believe is Greg Shahadi specialty. Actually, he's a fan of this. So d4 takes, and now knight takes d4, the main move. Knight c6, and here, okay, white can also play knight c3, which transposes back into a dragon, but one where black has a bit more flexibility than usual. So if white wants to try to punish black for his move order, for playing, well, by transposition an accelerated dragon, this particular move order was a hyper accelerated dragon. Anyway, if white wants to punish black, then he should play c4, and that's what Almashi played. So knight f6, knight c3, and then here black has three main moves. So there's d6, which I think is the most common. Knight takes d4 is played in the game as the second most common, and then there's also bishop to g7. All right, we'll come back to this spot in a moment. Knight takes d4, queen takes d4, and here we have our provocative moment. So the usual move here, by a long way, is d6, preventing white from playing e5, or at least preventing white from playing e5 in a potentially meaningful situation. Of course, white could still play it. It's not a blunder, but black would happily exchange on e5 and shouldn't have any real difficulties after that. But instead, Gusinov played bishop to g7. As I said, it's a very provocative move because it just invites e5 in response. I mean, the knight is good on f6. It's not clear where it's going to be good after e5. I mean, h5, I mean, e5, if knight h5, then g4 probably just picks up the knight, and I don't think black has sufficient counterplay there. Alternatively, what? Knight to g8, that's really the only other choice, and then the knight is going back home. All right, well, let's just go back here and make a few comments. So the first thing to note is that such ideas are not unique in chess. I mean, for one thing, there's the Ilyekin's defense. You know, e4, knight f6, and then e5, right? So black just invites it here. And there are other openings too. I mean, in the c3 Sicilian, for instance, knight f6 is often played here, inviting e5. Although, of course, in this case, the knight goes to d5 and generally can stay in the center. Also, even in our games, there are some places where we can examine this. So first of all, after c takes d4 and the hyper accelerated dragon, white can play queen takes d4, and here black very, very rarely plays f6. He almost always plays knight f6. Which in turn invites e5. Black's idea is to play knight c6 and again secure the d5 square for his knight, although it's going to keep getting kicked around. So here the knight must retreat either to b6 or c7 or go for the really sharp stuff with knight d to b4. All right, back to the game move order again here after all of this. So I mentioned that bishop to g7 was one of the possibilities for black, and here too it invites knight takes c6, b takes c6, and e5. And here the knight should probably go back to g8. And in all of these cases, what black is banking on is that white's move e5 is potentially overextending. That this pawn on e5 can get cut off and either be lost in some cases or at least exchanged away in others. And then, you know, what happened to white's center? So white generally doesn't play in this way, prefers to keep these pawns here on e4 and c4 where they exert a clamping influence, well, a clamping and a cramping influence on black, clamping down on d5 and making it difficult for black to achieve that liberating pawn break in the center. Whereas here, in this position, although white has pushed the black knight back to its starting square, the pawn is a bit loose, and if nothing else, black can play f6 or d6 at some moment and exchange it off, and then white's central preponderance is, well, it's clearly just disappeared. Actually, I shouldn't say central preponderance, because he doesn't have a central preponderance here. Black does, but clearly the white pawns are exerting a greater influence in the center, which they won't be after d6 or f6 and the pawns get exchanged. Okay, finally I wanted to note that after knight takes d4, in addition to the obvious queen takes d4, e5 was tried, e5 was tried once, either early this year or sometime in 2010. And I remember white won a very nice game with this too. I don't think it's a refutation of black's idea of this variation, certainly, but it's a very, very neat idea, and it's at least playable. Okay, probably Greg Shahade has discussed this in one of his videos, I would imagine, by now. Anyway, queen takes d4, bishop to g7. So I've talked about some analogies, I've discussed what black's alternative possibilities along the way are, as well as a number of white possibilities too. Now I want to discuss what you ought to do when you see such a move. And the first thing I would say is that unless your opponent is extremely weak, you should kind of take a step back and think about it from your opponent's point of view. I mean, you should assume that your opponent is at least a reasonable enough player to be aware of a move like e5, and then think, well, okay, what exactly is he hoping for? I mean, is e5 bad? Is it the kind of thing that he may have examined carefully with a computer? You know, try to evaluate just how dangerous it is for you, and try to think again, you know, well, what happens? Is such a move going to be an overcommitment on my part, or is black maybe taking a few too many liberties? Try to work out what black's plan is going to be. So it's very, very easy to either just, you know, shove the pawn forward and you know, work out the details later. You know, to be the kind of player who you know, what's the expression? So it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. So that's one approach you could take. The second approach is to just trust your opponent and assume that your opponent would never do anything so crazy unless he or she had worked it out in advance and knew that there was you know, that the pawn push would be dangerous only to white. So those are two positions that you really ought to avoid. So don't just take your opponent completely at faith, but also, you know, go the other way, and don't take your opponent for granted either. So weigh it up, and you might want to do that in this position too, and try to figure out what exactly black's plan is going to be and how to meet it. Okay, well, let's go on. So white played e5, kicked it back, played bishop to f4, shoring up the pawn and preparing to retreat the queen so there's no pin. Black, of course, jumps on the opportunity while it's still there. White offers a counter pin. Black obviously can't take the pawn, as this would lead to mate in just one move. So that's obviously not playable. Alright, so black played bishop to g4 though, and now he is threatening to play d takes e5, as well as, of course, threatening the rook on d1. The rook on a8 now covers the queen on d8, so there really is a threat. And this would be a good moment to try to figure out what white should do. So here we have a very interesting moment. So we know that black wants to play d takes e5. What do we do about this? Alright, well, the natural move here is to play f3, but the problem is that this does not stop d takes e5. So de, and now, okay, if white trades queens and trades rooks and takes the bishop, this is no good at all. Black takes the bishop and enjoys a clear extra pawn. I mean, this is just significantly better for black. Instead, white could take on e5, but then black just keeps swapping. So trades queens, trades the bishops, and then the bishop jumps back to d7. And white's a little bit better here, thanks to his extra space and slightly in development, but black has a reasonably clear plan of action. He'll put the bishop on c6, probably play knight f6, castle, and then challenge the d file, and maybe at some point push e5, although got to be a little careful about that. We don't want to weaken d5 too much if we're black. So as long as we have control over d5 and d6 and the rest, we can play in that way. Alright, so that's a little bit of an idea. So as I said, white has a bit more space, but black has his trumps too, and I think black would have fair drawing chances in this variation. So That's what happens on the natural f3. What else could white do, though? Well, the line that I showed you was actually played in an earlier game, and here Almashi came up with a novelty. I don't know if he prepared this at home. I'd be a little bit surprised if he did. I mean, it's not like this variation comes up. But anyway, wherever he found it, it was a nice idea, and I think the right one. He played c5. Now, the first thing to note is that d takes e5 has now been prevented. So after d takes e5, bishop to b5 check simply wins on the spot. If king f8, then white just takes twice and gives checkmate. And if bishop to d7, well, again, you just take the bishop and then take the pawn, and it's a free piece for absolutely nothing. Black has a hideously bad position. Okay, so d takes e5 is no good. Well, what if black takes timeout for a move like a6? Well, here there's a crucial difference between this version after white plays f3 and this version without c5 and a6 interpolated. And you might want to take a moment and try to figure out what the difference is. So let's go back to this version. So have a look here and figure out why black cannot play d takes e5 this time around. Well, the answer is something almost out of a Morphy versus amateurs game. If d takes e5, then queen a4 check. Of course, before there was a pawn on c4, so the queen couldn't get there. All right, the queen on d8 is hanging to the white rook, so bishop d7 is forced. And now, rook takes d7. Okay, black has to take. Bishop to b5 is the idea. A takes b5, queen a8 check, queen d8. And it still may not be immediately evident what white is up to here. He's still down a pawn. Black would like to trade queens. The bishop on f4 is hanging. But queen takes b7 is simply winning. The problem for black is that after e takes f4, white could play c6, or better still, rook to d1 first. So the queen is basically trapped because its only safe square is on a5, but then queen c8 forces mate next move. So bishop to d4 is the only playable move, but then c6 is just devastating. c7 is next, and there's no good rejoinder. Also, knight takes b5 is certainly good enough to win too. So black is just in dire straits here, and it's just completely lost, really. Instead of d takes e5, another move is to play bishop to e6, preserving the bishop. But after queen to b4, just a prosaic move. The big pileup on d6, not to mention the threat to the pawn on b7 as well, gives white a winning advantage. So d takes e5 is no good, a6 is no good. Well, that leaves bishop takes d1, and that's what happened. So another obvious move. Why not just grab the rook? Well, we'll find out. Bishop to b5 check, king f8, rook takes d1, and here white has, I would say, more than enough for the exchange. But black is not lost yet, so it's still a game, and Gusinov plays well for a while. a6 is not such a good move here because white transfers the bishop to this diagonal, which is even better than where it was. So the bishop did its job on b5. If it's chased, it should look for other work. So instead, Gusinov played d5, which is a very good move, keeping all of these lines closed. So there's not going to be this explosion on d6, which would lead to problems with e7 for black. So d5, as I said, is an attempt to keep the lines as closed as possible. All right, here queen takes d5 is a possibility for white. After the trade of queens, white still has a big lead in space, a big lead in development, and it compensates for the small material disadvantage. Still, though, after black plays bishop to h6, this helps him. So he gets to trade off a little bit of material, and he gets to unravel, or start unraveling his kingside. After something like bishop to d2, takes, knight h6, rook d7, rook to b8, white's advantage is pretty minimal at this point. I mean, the problem that white has is that black doesn't really have enough weaknesses to really go after. So I think in the game, Almashi's decision to play knight takes d5 was slightly better. This leads to a queen trade as well, but the difference is that after e6, knight c3, takes and takes, playing e6 weakens some dark squares. So now d6 is weak, f6 is potentially weak, and the 7th rank is a little bit more open now than it was when the pawn was back on e7. So it was a very nice little finesse playing knight takes d5. As I said, it didn't change what would happen in terms of exchanges, but Black is, the bind is now a bit stronger than it would have been. Alright, black can try a few moves here. A6 is one reasonable try to kick the bishop back. Again, it might go to c4, but perhaps bishop to e2 with the idea of swinging it around to f3 is quite sensible as well. One possible continuation is rook c8, knight e4, knight e7, aiming to drop the knight on d5, which was why bishop to c4 was an entirely reasonable alternative. So now rook to d7, knight d5, bishop g3, h5, h4, rook c7, takes, and knight to d6. And you can see that even with the exchange of rooks, black really hasn't yet escaped this terrible cramped position that he's in. And his queenside pawns are in some serious danger too. So this is definitely a good position for white. A second possibility from here, instead of a6, is g5, and this might be black's best move. After bishop to g3, which is pretty much forced, h5, let's say h3, h4, bishop h2, and knight e7. Here I think black has enough space for his pieces that, while he's not better, I think he's not much worse either. I mean, I think he's... I'm not quite willing to say that the position is equal, but black is as I said, entirely in the game. White cannot support the e5 pawn with f4, and once the e5 pawn drops, if it drops, then the black king will get the g7 square. So I really think that black has pretty fair chances to hold on still, though again white would be for choice. In the game, after rook takes d4, black played rook to c8. And what did white do about the threat to the c-pawn? Well, the answer is nothing, because there really isn't a threat to the c-pawn. White simply played rook to d7. And rook takes c5 is not exactly a brilliant idea, because rook to d8 check, king e7, and rook to e8 is checkmate. So black found a different idea. He played g5. Move that he probably should have played a move ago, though better late than never. Anyway, here white has a couple of decent options. He played bishop takes g5, which isn't bad, but probably bishop to e3 was a bit better. It's certainly counterintuitive to hang the e5 pawn, but after bishop e5, rook takes b7, the g5 pawn is under attack, the a7 pawn is under attack, and it was nice to have the pawn on e5, keeping black kind of locked up, but where white is going to win this game at this point is with the queenside majority. Anyway, another try for black is a6, trying to at least clear the 7th rank of his own pawns before going chasing white's. Okay, white could play bishop to e2, and after bishop e5 again play rook takes b7. Here too it's clearly better for white. The pawn on a6 is vulnerable there as well to the bishop on e2. However, it might be even better to not play bishop to e2, but to play c6. Rather a flashy, show-offy move, but a strong one. Alright, first things first. If black grabs the bishop, then c takes b7, and then bishop to a7 is just a simple win. Alright, if the king goes to e8, just rook to c8. No big deal. Okay, if instead b takes c6, then bishop a6, rook b8. Yeah, if the rook goes to a8, then bishop b7, bishop b7, and then bishop c5 check followed by bishop takes c6 ought to win. So rook b8 stops that. At least the bishop to b7 part of it. Bishop d4, defending the pawn. Knight h6, knight e4, knight g4, and white preserves the e5 pawn with knight to f6. And in this position, white is clearly better. Material is approximately equal. White's got bishop and 2 pawns for the rook, or more precisely, 2 bishops and 2 pawns for the rook and knight. Maybe not winning, but definitely very, very good. The rook on h8, I mean, is still a spectator. The knight is at least going to have a difficult time working its way all the way back to the queen side. I mean, if it goes to e5, white plays rook to c7, and meanwhile, the a and b pawns are going to find their way up the board. The bishop on e7 covers b4, the bishop on e6 covers b5. Once it's there, then bishop c5 or bishop to d8 takes care of b6, then b7, bishop c7, and so on. Alright, Instead of this, though, white played bishop takes g5, which is reasonable. First of all, it stops rook takes c5 because of rook to d8 mate, though, as we already saw, it would be mate in 2 even without the bishop on g5's help. If bishop takes e5, then rook takes b7. If rook c5, now there's no mate because the black king has the g7 square. Still, though, after bishop to e3, black is in a fair amount of trouble. If he plays rook c7, then white trades, grabs on a7, and plays a4, and maybe black's position is still tenable. I don't think it's lost yet, but it's obviously very, very good and very easy to play from white's point of view. Another try is rook to c8, avoiding the trade of rooks, which in a way makes sense. I mean, if the white queenside pawns are a threat, and it's going to take the black rook from h8 a long time to really get into the action, it might be a good idea for black to keep another defender over there. Alright, so from here, bishop to d7. Okay, black could play rook to c7, but that would be a lot like what we just saw. So let's say rook to c4. Okay, rook takes a7. And now, black should not take on c3. This I think offers or provides a very nice illustration of just how powerful the bishop pair can be in an open board. So b takes c3, rook c3 check, king to d4. The rook is almost dominated. I mean, it's only got the c4 square. That aside, I mean, it's just trapped. So rook c4, king d3, rook h4, and now white has two moves that are pretty much winning. One is bishop to d4, which wins the exchange, or perhaps black could play f6, but then bishop takes e6 is just hideously bad as well. Or instead of bishop to d4, another good move is bishop to c5 check. Okay, if knight to e7, the bishop moves from d7, or sorry, even better, perhaps just rook a8 check, rook takes h8, and then bishop takes e7. So from here, black should play king to g7, but now bishop takes e6 is crushingly strong as well. So white's bishops are just monsters. Alright, instead of bishop takes c3, then black should play knight to f6. And now after, for instance, bishop takes e6, and this sequence here, which leads to a lot of complications, and ultimately black regaining the material. But okay, what we've got now is white having 4 pawns for the bishop, and not an awful lot by way of winning chances. I think black has excellent drawing chances at this point. Black has almost no winning chances, but white, I think, is not likely to win against perfect play. Alright, perfect play is not so easy to achieve, but I think black really ought to be able to save this game with accuracy. So maybe this line is good. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there are some improvements for white, but it does show that black can at least put up pretty good resistance with bishop takes e5, and then rook c5. Again, the crucial point being that black's king can escape via g7. Anyway, in the game, Gusinov played a6. Alright, where should the bishop retreat? What's the best square? Well, if you were paying attention a couple of minutes ago, you know that the answer is the bishop should not retreat, but c6 should instead be played. And this gives black an unpleasant choice. Either he allows his queenside to get destroyed, or he wins the piece but gives white this tremendously strong passer. Alright, if b takes c6, which is not what happened, then bishop takes a6. Okay, if rook to b8, then again bishop to e2. And here, white has a very strong move. Do you see what it is? Bishop's in action again. Bishop to h5. So it's a sneaky idea. The bishop goes from b5 to e2 to h5, but black is really without a good defense at this point. So instead of this, rook to e8 makes sense. So that way, on bishop to e2, bishop takes e5, bishop h5, black can at least play knight to e7 and not be completely lost. It's still a bad position for him, but he can kick a little bit. It might be better for white to play f4, continuing to keep the black bishop sealed in. After bishop to h6, then takes, and then bishop to b7. And white's plan is very simple: a4, and you don't get any points for guessing the next 4 moves in the plan. I think white is winning there. So in the game, black played a takes b5 instead. If he's going to suffer, he decided that he might as well have a little material to keep him company. Here, either move by the c pawn is winning. c7 should win. Almashi played c takes b7, rook to b8, and now f4. So a nice quiet move. I mean, it's funny. White's down a rook, albeit for 3 pawns, but still, there's no hurry. It's more important for him to keep black restrained. The pawn on b7 takes care of the queen side. White will play rook to c7 and rook to c8 in due course, but you can't play it here. Well, actually, maybe, let me think. Can he play it here? Making some quick... Oh, no, right, of course. Yeah, bishop takes e5, and I forgot for a moment that after rook c8, again, there's king to g7. So that's why rook c7 is no good here, but now after f4, it's a threat. It is a serious threat to play rook to d8 check. So black played bishop to h6, and now the idea is that if rook to d8 check, then again, the black bishop comes to the rescue. This is check, and then bishop takes e5 takes care of the pawn. Alright, white traded, and now played knight takes b5, and now it's 4 pawns for the rook, plus the knight is going to come to d6, and of course the a pawn is going to do its thing, and unless black can really defend against that with tremendous alacrity, he's dead meat. So Gusinov plays king to e8, nothing really else that he can do, and after rook c7, king to d8. So here he comes. Alright, white plays a4, and black plays knight f5. Alright, white to move. What do you do here? If you said rook takes f7, you're right. So that's the key move here. Simple greed pays off. If a5, then black has a strong rejoinder, knight to d4. It costs black a piece, well, in exchange for a pawn, but it really undermines the strength of white's queenside majority. White is still much better here, mind you. I mean, white has 3 pawns for the exchange, 2 connected passers over on the queen side, but black can at least put up a fair amount of resistance here. After rook takes f7, black really had nothing better than king to e8, because white again is going to play a5, a6, etc. So king e8, rook c7, king d8, and now we do play a5. So it's the exact same thing. Knight to d4, rook c8 check, takes, and okay, king takes c8, knight takes d4, but this time it's 4 pawns for the exchange. The e6 pawn is loose. White's going to have no trouble making 1 or even 2 passed pawns over on the king side to go with the 2 on the queen side. And so this is just too much. And in fact, here, after b takes c8 queen, black resigned. So a very nice game. Some nice tactical ideas by Almashi. But the key thing that I want you to get from this, besides the opening theory and the aesthetics of this particular game, are, let's say, to evaluate positions like this, or not to evaluate, but to approach positions like this in the right way. That's really what I'd like you to get from this, I think, above the particular lessons about this opening and so on. So when you see these provocations, again, don't rush in blindly. Try to figure things out from your opponent's point of view. Assume your opponent sees the idea to play e5 or whatever the case may be in your game, and try to figure out why exactly or where exactly black's counterplay is going to come. How does black hope to exploit what you've done in a favorable way down the road? So take your time, try to understand it, and then, depending on what you decide, I mean, if you see a good, clear plan for your opponent, and it's a sufficiently scary plan, then don't go forward. But again, the opposite is also true. You should not just assume that your opponent is a genius who couldn't possibly overlook something like this or misevaluate the position. Consider e5 seriously or its equivalents in your game, and decide based on some reflection, not on impulse. Okay, so that'll do it for this game. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you can use that lesson as well, and I will see you next time. Again, a retroactive Happy Thanksgiving. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.